Hello everyone, Teacher Quentin here with our final video in our series of the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. If you've missed some of our other videos in this series, we covered goals 1 through 14. But today we will finish up the final three goals, goals 15 through 17. So, without further ado, let's get started. Goal number 15 involves life on land. If you were able to watch our other videos, one of the other goals in the UN's SDGs was involving life underwater. And so it involved goals that protected and sustained our oceans. Goal number 15 involves life on land. So this goal is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and halt biodiversity loss. Now, there are a lot of big scientific terms in this goal. So, just to begin unpacking some of those, let's talk about just a couple here. So, the first I want to mention is desertification. So, desertification is a term that means when land becomes more desert like. And so, usually, this involves when a land or an area undercomes sustained drought. This also can happen when there is deforestation, which causes a loss in vegetation and then causes the land to become dusty and more desert like. And so when we talk about desertification, this is what we're meaning. Also, another word that I want to talk about here before we move on is land degradation and the halt of biodiversity loss. So degradation is just the degrading of land. And so land, if it's fertile and it has the nutrients and the environmental and conditions that it needs to thrive, then the land will be it will have vegetation. It will support the life that naturally is involved in that habitat, be it animal life or other plant life. But due to human activity and the climate changes that are happening, a lot of land in different places around the world is becoming degraded, or it's lowering to where it doesn't support the same amount of life, be it vegetation, like plant life, or the animal life that is a natural part of that habitat. And now, halting biodiversity loss is just halting the amount and the diversity of the different living organisms, be it plant life or animal life, that are in a particular environment. So, we want to maintain the diverse natural environment that we have here on Earth. And so, those are some particular parts of Goal 15 that I wanted to highlight first. Now, as we get into more details, we'll talk a little bit more about some of those terms. All right, so as we can see here, more than a quarter of species assessed by the IUCN Red List are threatened with extinction. So we can see here a proportion of species that is threatened by extinction. So 41% of amphibians, so things like frogs, or salamanders. Over 34% of conifers, so that's a specific type of tree that usually is like a pine tree or a tree with needles. Reef building corals, so the underwater organisms, coral reefs. Mammals, 26%, and 14% of birds. And so these are the percentage of different species, different types of species that are threatened with extinction. Now, the IUCN Red List tracks data on more than 134,400 species of mammals, birds, amphibians, reef-building corals, and conifers. More than 37,400 species are currently threatened with extinction. So that is a lot. Now, when we talk about extinction, What do we mean? So, extinction is the termination of a kind of organism or a group of kinds, usually a species. The moment of extinction is generally considered to be the death of the last individual of that species. So, when all of a particular type of animal or species of animal or even plant life, such as conifers or reef building corals, dies, when the last individual of that species dies, it is considered extinct. So the UN's 15th SDG is really about saving different species, land species specifically, from extinction. Now, progress to safeguard key biodiversity areas has stalled over the last 5 years. So, as we can see here, in this graphic, we are showing the percentages of land around the world that are actually protected areas. And so by a protected area, we mean that a government or a locality has determined that they will protect a certain land area and that so that the natural habitat will continue to thrive. And so that may be ensuring that no further trees or vegetation are cut down. That may be to protect the different animal species that live in that environment from being hunted, captured, or killed. And so these are the types of things that we typically will see in a protected area. And so only 43% of terrestrial areas are protected. Only 42% of freshwater areas are protected. And only 41% of mountain areas are protected. So not very many protected areas on the globe. So just to kind of talk about a few of these terms, let's start with stalled. So stalled is a good word that means paused or stopped. So when something is stalled, it means that it has stopped progressing. It is no longer moving forward. So we can say that the progress of increasing these safeguarded areas has stalled over the past 5 years. Now, also, a couple of other terms that we may be unfamiliar with. The term terrestrial. Terrestrial. That means that something is of or on the land. So, terrestrial animals are those that live on land. Terrestrial vegetation or terrestrial plants are those you will find on land. Lastly, fresh water. Fresh water is a non-saltwater source. So these are things like lakes, rivers, and ponds. So anything that's not seawater or ocean water, we would then determine is fresh water or non-salt water. All right, so that is about goal number 15, life on land and protecting life on land. Let's take a look at the 16th SDG, the 16th goal that the UN has for sustainable development. All right, goal 16 involves peace, justice, and strong institutions. So here in goal 16, the UN hopes to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So here, what we are really talking about is the inclusion of all peoples, of all societies, in all different places around the world to be able to peacefully work together, to have justice, and to have accountability at all levels around the world. So this would mean that no matter where you live, how rich or poor your country may be, that the UN wants to promote inclusiveness and peaceful development around the world. So let's look at some more details on why goal number 16 is so important. The pandemic of COVID-19 is intensifying specifically children's risks of exploitation. So this includes trafficking and child labor. So we can see that 1 in 3, so a third of trafficking victims were children as of 2018. Also, child labor has rose to 160 million children as of 2020. And this is the first increase that we've seen in child labor in 2 decades, so 20 years. Now, there are a couple words I would like to go over in this graphic. The word exploitation. Exploitation. So that is an action or a fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work. So when we exploit something, we take advantage of the work that someone else is doing for our own benefit. And so the exploitation of children would be taking advantage or unfairly treating children in order to benefit from the work that they do, such as child labor. Another term here that I want to go over is the word trafficking. Trafficking. So this word is a little bit different than what we traditionally would think of as traffic, like when you're driving down a road and there's lots of traffic. Although they do have a little bit of a similarity. Trafficking in this case, when we have it with a K, if you notice ICKING, this type of trafficking is to deal or trade in something illegal. So, when children are trafficked, this is the illegal use or trading of children for their labor, or for other reasons that are illegal. So that's the key point here, is that trafficking involves some type of illegal activity. So there are things like illegal drug trafficking, child trafficking, or even trafficking of other human beings for labor. So even adults can be trafficked. And so this is something that the UN wants to end as a part of goal number 16, the exploitation and trafficking of children and other groups as well. Now, in 2020, the killings of 331 human rights defenders were reported in 32 countries, which is an increase in 18% from 2019. So as we can see, the people who have been most involved in defending human rights, there have been 331 murders of these people. And so it's not always easy to promote human rights around the world. And those entities or governments or people or organizations that are involved in the exploitation or trafficking of other humans often will resort to violent means to continue these activities. So, what are human rights? When we talk about human rights defenders, what do we mean by that? So, human rights are basic rights or privileges considered to be for everyone. So these are rights that all human beings should have, regardless of where they live on Earth, how much money they have, the color of their skin, their religion. These are rights that all humans, just for being human, should have. And so as a part of the UN's 16th goal in their Sustainable Development Goals, human rights is the major part of that justice that we want to see for all. And so ending the exploitation and trafficking of children and other humans is part of that human rights goal that the UN has here. All right, and now for our 17 15th goal, the final goal in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has set out for by the year 2030. Goal number 17 is partnerships for the goals. So really here, the UN wants to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. So when we look at goals 1 through 16, these all had a focus on what the UN would like to do by the year 2030. Goal number 17 really brings all of these 16 goals together and says that the best way and what we can do to really make sure that we make progress on these other 16 goals is to create partnerships or work together as a global community in order to promote sustainable development. So let's look at a few more of these details. Define predictions. Remittance flows to low and middle income countries reached $540 billion in 2020, only 1.6% below the 2019 level. So when we think about this, and why this is so important and why it defied predictions is because during the pandemic, many people's financial situation got worse, not better, due to the closures, the lockdowns, and other measures that were taken during the pandemic caused an economic downfall in many places. So that's why that defined the predictions. The amount of remittance flows to low and middle income countries was actually only 1.6% below the level of 2019 or before the pandemic. Now, what exactly is a remittance flow? This is another very technical term, but essentially a remittance is money sent to another party, usually one in another country. Remittances represent one of the largest sources of income for people in low income and developing nations. So, in simpler terms, a remittance is usually an amount of money that is sent from one party to another, and that could be an individual in one country sending money to an individual in a different country or a group of individuals. So one of the most popular, one of the most common types of a remittance would be such as a person who has immigrated to a different country and then sends money back to their family members who may still live in their country of origin. And so that is a type of remittance. And so that's why seeing that this was only 1.6% below the pre-pandemic level, it was actually defied expectations, because with the economic downturn experienced in so many places, it would be thought that these would be much lower. Now, on the other side, foreign direct investment has dropped by 40%. So we can see that in 2019, there was $1.5 trillion of foreign direct investment, whereas in 2020, only $1 trillion of foreign direct investment. Now, before we move on, what is a foreign direct investment or a direct investment? A direct investment is an investment in the form of a controlling ownership in a business in one country by an entity based in another country. So what we mean here is, whereas a remittance flow is usually more personal or on an individual basis, like a person in one country sending money to a person or a party in a different country, a direct investment would be as if a business in one country, so let's say a business in the United States, then buys a majority portion of a company or an organization in another country so that they then are the controller or have ownership of that entity in another country. So that is the direct investment. So that's usually on a company or corporate level when we talk about direct investment. And so the reason we highlight these two is because for the UN's 17th goal of forming partnerships and cooperation, we're really looking at this from a financial standpoint as well. So for countries that are in a wealthier or in a better position to help those in areas that are in less or lower income or middle income countries. And just to highlight such the disparity that we still see even today, nearly half of the global population, so 3.7 billion people, are still not connected to the internet. Are still not connected to the internet. So think about that for just 1 second, especially when we think about the pandemic and how so many things such as education and work all went to an online environment. Over half or nearly half of the world is not even connected to the internet. So this only increases that disparity or that difference in around the world. And so this is why these partnerships that the UN hopes will happen on a global level in order to help with the other 16 goals is such an important part for goal number 17. Well, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to watch our series on the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals. If there's one thing that I would say that we could take from looking at these 17 goals is that we live in a global community. And we really need to always remember that. You know, it's very easy for each of us to think about ourselves or our countries, but really when we shift our focus to really thinking of everyone as a global community, then we can see where there's areas that are lacking and that it takes the cooperation of a global community, not just one or two countries, to really have an impact on our world and continue to have a place where future generations can continue to thrive. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.